Ferrari's operating margins are above 28%. Revenue in 2024 crossed 6.7 billion euros. The stock has tripled over 5 years, and the market capitalization hovers near 70 billion euros, making it one of the most valuable automotive companies on earth relative to the number of cars it actually produces. By every metric Wall Street worships, Ferrari is thriving. And that is precisely why almost nobody is asking the question that should terrify every person who has ever genuinely loved this brand. Because the crisis unfolding inside Maranello is not the kind you read about in earnings reports. It is the kind you only recognize when it is already too late. The kind where a legend quietly trades everything it once stood for, one compromise at a time. Until one morning the badge is still on the hood, but the soul behind it is completely gone. Ferrari's 2024 numbers defy gravity. Net revenues reached 6.677 billion euros, up nearly 12% year over year. Operating profit before interest and taxes stood at 1.888 billion euros, carving out an EBIT margin of 28.3%, territory usually reserved for the rarest luxury houses, not automakers. Net profit surged 21% to 1.526 billion euros, and diluted earnings per share hit 8 euros and 46 cents per share. The company delivered 13,752 cars, a figure that would barely register for mass market rivals, but, in Maranello, supports a market capitalization near 70 billion euros. On the New York Stock Exchange, Ferrari's share price has more than doubled since 2019, and the company's value now rivals or eclipses industrial giants that produce 10 or 20 times as many vehicles. These are not the results of a company in retreat or confusion. They are the hallmarks of a machine that has mastered the logic of modern capital, extracting extraordinary profit from scarcity, brand power, and relentless demand. With more than half of shipments now hybrids and the rest still dominated by internal combustion, Ferrari's model straddles tradition and transformation with clinical precision. Every quarter, the numbers reinforce a single message to investors. Growth is not a hope, it is a mandate. The pressure to sustain these margins, to justify this valuation, and to keep the order book full is no longer a background concern. It is the air Ferrari breathes. Ferrari was never just a car company. For Enzo Ferrari, it was a faith, one built on ritual, sacrifice, and the worship of a single living God, the V12 engine. In the archives, Enzo's words echo with certainty. He called the engine the soul of the car and insisted that every other part existed only to serve its heartbeat. To him, beauty was not a matter of styling or luxury, but the byproduct of victory and mechanical purity. The V12's scream at 9,000 revolutions per minute was not a technical achievement. It was a hymn, a proof of life. This devotion shaped a culture where scarcity was sacred. Ferrari capped production at levels unthinkable for any other global brand. Just 7,000 cars a year for decades, later rising only as much as the myth could bear. A Ferrari was not bought. It was earned through patience and reverence. Waiting lists stretched 2 years or more, and owners wore their place in line as a badge of belonging. The ritual did not end with delivery. Each handover in Maranello became a ceremony. A white-draped podium, a glass of Prosecco, a blessing from an engineer. The car was not a product, but a passage into a brotherhood, a chosen few entrusted with the spirit of the founder. In this world, numbers were an afterthought. What mattered was the feeling of anticipation, of scarcity, of the V12's living voice. The myth was built, brick by brick, on the idea that Ferrari was not for everyone and never would be. It was a promise kept in steel, sound, and waiting. Every decision, every limit, every ritual was a defense of that promise. Enzo's creed was strict, even unforgiving, but it made the badge priceless. Now, as the world measures Ferrari in margins and market capitalization, the question is whether any of that feeling can survive the logic of modern capital. On October 21st, 2015, Ferrari stepped onto the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, its shares priced at $52. The world's most storied badge became a ticker symbol, and with that single act, the rules changed. Only 10% of the company floated, but the deeper shift was structural, a dual-class share system that handed long-term insiders, especially Exor and the Ferrari family, loyalty voting shares worth 2 votes each. This was not a mere fundraising event. It was a deliberate architecture. Preserve control, but invite the discipline and glare of public markets. The board expanded, now including executive powerhouses and independent directors, with John Elkann as executive chairman and Piero Ferrari as vice chairman. The old order, one man's vision, enforced by ritual and scarcity, gave way to a new mandate. Serve both the myth and the market, every quarter, without fail. Behind the scenes, the language of the prospectus laid out the new priorities. Scarcity was no longer an end in itself. It became a tool for margin management. The key performance indicators shifted from waiting lists in V12 purity to EBITDA margin, order book visibility, and revenue growth. Shareholder value was not a side effect, but the target. The loyalty share program was designed to keep the brand's legacy in the hands of those who claimed to protect it, but the logic of the exchange was relentless: growth, expansion, return. The IPO was not just a financial event. It was the moment Ferrari's soul was recast in the language of capital. The stage was set for decisions that would have been unthinkable in Enzo's era, and the first test would arrive sooner than anyone expected. Over my dead body. That was Sergio Marchionne's vow in 2016, when asked if Ferrari would ever build an SUV. The promise was absolute, a final barricade against the slow creep of compromise. 6 years later, in September 2022, the barricade fell. Ferrari unveiled the Purosangue, its first 4-door, 5-seat machine, cloaked in the language of purity. The name itself, Purosangue, means thoroughbred. But for the faithful, it was a word hollowed out by context, a badge pinned to a silhouette that broke every unwritten law of the Maranello order. The Purosangue arrived with a base price above 390,000 euros, a sum that outstripped most rivals and dared buyers to question its legitimacy. The first production run sold out instantly. Waiting lists reappeared, not as a ritual of reverence, but as a signal to the world's wealthiest that the gates were open wider than ever. The launch press kit boasted of a 725 horsepower V12 4-wheel drive in a cabin trimmed for families, not racers. Journalists who once revered the Maranello altar now debated whether the car was a necessary evolution or a sacrilege. For purists, the answer was clear: the line had been crossed. The machine was no longer a vessel for Enzo's spirit, but a product calibrated for a new breed of customer, one who values convenience, height, and badge equity above all. The logic behind the Purosangue was as cold as it was irresistible. The SUV market is where margins are fattest, where growth is measured not in seconds per lap, but in quarterly revenue. The IPO had set this wheel in motion. Now, the most sacred promise in the Ferrari catechism had been broken, not by accident, but by design. The backlash was immediate and fierce, a chorus of voices mourning the moment Ferrari traded myth for mandate. Subscribe for the next chapter. Benedetto Vigna arrived in Maranello with a mind trained in silicon, not steel. His background at ST Microelectronics brought the logic of microchips to a company built on combustion and noise. Under his watch, Ferrari's first fully electric car will debut in 2025, an event that will send silence through a brand once defined by the scream of a V12. The investor roadmap lays out the new reality. By 2030, 40% of Ferraris leaving the factory gates will be electric. That means over 5,000 cars each year will glide away without a sound, their power hidden behind the hush of electrons. The annual production cap, set at 13,000, remains, but the meaning of scarcity is changing. With the V12's end set for the late 2020s, the ritual of ignition, the shiver of anticipation, and the roar that once made a Ferrari unmistakable are being replaced by a silence that no spreadsheet can measure. The soul of the brand is being reprogrammed, one quiet car at a time. A Ferrari parked between SUVs in a luxury mall garage, its badge reduced to another token in a row of status symbols. That is the nightmare haunting Maranello's old guard. The myth was once armored by racing glory, the last constructor's title in 2008, the last driver's crown in 2007, each a relic of a vanished era. In 2022, Charles Leclerc's 46-point lead evaporated into defeat, undone by errors and mechanical failures, the prancing horse stumbling in full view of the world. As the checkered flag slips further from reach, the legend that a Ferrari is born on the track and sanctified in victory begins to rot from within. Meanwhile, the waiting list has become a velvet rope for the global elite, not a gauntlet for the faithful. The new buyer wants a badge, not a blessing, a Purosangue for the school run, not a 488 for the circuit. Ferrari's myth is no longer earned, only acquired. The risk is not that the legend is lost overnight, but that it is hollowed out, one compromise at a time. Subscribe for the next chapter. Today, Ferrari stands at a crossroads of profit and principle. Each IPO share, each Purosangue sold, each silent electric motor chips away at the faith that made it immortal. The danger is not bankruptcy, but becoming just another logo. Legends die one compromise at a time. Subscribe for more stories like this.